You boys be quiet down there!
If you're a console gamer, then there's a good chance that you've come across one of the many games in the Silpheed series over the years. But if you were a PC gamer in North America in the late 80s or early 90s, you may have played a popular game on DOS, or maybe even the Apple IIGS, called Silpheed, released by Sierra Online. The game was an overhead space shooter which utilized polygons and a forced perspective in order to simulate a 3D effect, and was considered to be a very impressive game in its time, receiving high praise from critics. But while both of these versions were quite faithful ports, neither of them were the very first version of the game. You see, this game was originally released in Japan by Game Arts, 2 years before it hit North American shores. And in Japan, the game wasn't for IBM compatibles, or even an Apple machine, but one of the most popular Japanese PC platforms of the 80s, the NEC PC-88. Today I want to take a close look at this original version and see how it stacks up against the others. So, as I always like to do in this series, let's start by taking a look at the packaging for the PC-88 version. On the cover, there's a really cool illustration of the protagonist ship, Sylpheed, in a hangar, as a maintenance crew appears to be attaching a weapon. The back of the game brags about the various technological features that would have been impressive when it was released in 1986. The text here boasts computerized voices and 20 stages of 3D full-color graphics, running at a blazing 15 frames per second. That may not sound very impressive today, but if you've seen any footage from PC-88 games before on PC-88 Paradise, then you know that the PC-88 isn't exactly known for smooth frame rates. Finally, the screenshots at the bottom show off 6 different scenes in the game that they wanted to highlight. Inside we have the manual, which may be in black and white, but does include a lot of useful information and tips. And the game itself resides on 2 floppy disks, which are simply both inserted into the system and left there for the entirety of the game. Let's boot them up now. The game starts off with some short introductory words in English. By the way, hardly any of this game is in Japanese, so this is one PC-88 game where language won't impose any barriers to your enjoyment. The next part of the opening sequence grabs our attention with a long 3D animation. While the game itself uses simple polygons, the opening here is done completely in vector graphics, which must have made it easier to pull off 3D graphics of this scale on the PC-88. The effect is impressive. The next part of the opening introduces our ship Sylpheed and then the boss ships of the game. The last part of the intro finishes up the rest of the English story. To give a more coherent summary, humans found an alien ship in the year 3032, which allowed them to make rapid advancements in space exploration and colonization, and the United Universe was eventually established to govern the colonized planets. The plot of the game begins when a terrorist organization led by a mysterious villain named Zakalite attacks. Actually, in Japanese it's pronounced Zakalite, but the English versions pronounce it Zakalite, so I'm gonna just go with that. Zakalite steals the most advanced battleship ever created, called Gluar. Sorry for my butchered French pronunciation. Zakalite then steals the planetary Buster missiles, which are basically space nukes, capable of destroying entire planets. The United Universe's supercomputer Yggdrasil calculates that the best chance to stop him is a solo mission by a prototype ship called Sylpheed. Well, it's a space shooter. Of course humankind's only hope is a solo mission. After the opening, we finally get to the title screen. Well, enough for introductions. Let's play the game. As you can see, the game runs pretty smoothly for a PC-88 title, and has some decent sounding FM sound that you have been hearing throughout this video. While the gameplay screen uses a forced 3D perspective, it actually plays the same as a normal 2D vertical scrolling shooter. The playfield is just narrower near the top of the screen in order to achieve the effect. Some in Japan called this a half-top view shooting game. It can take some getting used to in order to accurately predict where enemies and projectiles are headed. And you'd better get good at avoiding them, since this game is no slouch when it comes to difficulty. You get only 1 life and no continues. However, your shield does allow you to withstand 6 hits. This meter may look a little confusing, but it's just mirrored on both sides and decreases by 1 bar on both sides each time you take a hit. After all 6 bars are gone, you still don't die until you take 3 more hits. The first 2 of these hits will randomly damage either your left or right weapon or your engine, and the final hit will, of course, finish off Sylpheed for good. The fact that you can take so many hits can lull you into a false sense of security, but you'd better play as if every single hit matters, or this game will waste no time putting you in your place. Mastering Sylpheed's 5 different weapons will help to give you a fighting chance. The first is the forward beam, which you begin the game with. Next is the phalanx beam, which fires several shots forward and also a couple to the side. The V-beam fires 2 shots forward in a V formation, for a total of 4 shots if you have 2 of them equipped simultaneously. Next we have the laser cannon, which is of course just a powerful forward shot great for making quick work of the bosses. Lastly, there is auto-aiming. This isn't really a homing shot since it doesn't chase enemies around the screen, but rather aims automatically in the direction of the nearest enemy. The weapons don't appear as power-ups you can pick up, but rather you earn them each time you collect 50,000 points. At the beginning of each area, you can then choose a weapon for both the left and right sides of your ship, and you have to be very strategic about which weapons you select for each area, since you can only use each weapon for one area. When you clear an area, the weapons you were just using are gone, and won't be available until you earn them again by collecting more points. There are also 10 additional power-ups which you can collect during gameplay, which have an immediate effect. First of all, the S is a speed-up, like you have seen in many other shooters. However, you can't collect more than one. The F is automatic fire, so that you can give your trigger thumb a rest. Both of these power-ups can be lost by taking damage to your engine or weapon, and will need to be picked up again later should you manage to survive. H is Shield Advance, which restores 1 bar of your shield, and R is All Repair, which completely restores your shield. D is Destroy, which clears the screen of all enemies. N is Bonus Score, which awards you some points. The places where power-ups appear are not random, and some of them are quite rare and only appear in a few specific spots in the game. W is a weapon power-up, which makes whatever weapon you're using do more damage. Unlike the S and F, this can't be lost and should be thought of as a permanent level up, which you can accumulate up to 3 of throughout the game. Since the later areas of the game are designed to be played with 3 of these, you really don't want to accidentally miss any of them. The next rare item is B for Barrier. This makes you invulnerable to all of the small red projectiles until you screw up and get hit by a solid object like an enemy. For experts, this is the most valuable power-up in the game, which you want to try to hold on to indefinitely. But if you suck at the game like me, you'll probably just lose it right away a few seconds after you pick it up. Next is A for Asteroid Belt. This gives you 3 asteroids which will dance around your ship and destroy any objects they make contact with. The asteroids are also destroyed in the process, so it won't last long. This is a cool item and it's a shame it doesn't make many appearances in the game. Last is I for Invincible, which of course makes you temporarily invincible. This also gives you a generous bonus each time you destroy an enemy with your ship rather than your shots. There are 4 different types of areas in Silpheed. The first is simply outer space, the basic type of area. Next is Asteroid Belt, where you'll face an onslaught of quick-moving enemies while simultaneously being pummeled by indestructible asteroids. Next are the planet areas. These areas are slightly more impressive as they have a background made to simulate the effect of descending toward a planet. This is achieved by displaying an image that simply expands from the bottom of the screen. Lastly are my favorite, the fortress areas. These show a short animation of Sylpheed flying into a highly defended fortress. The 3D effect here reminds me of Zaxxon 3D for Sega Master System. But of course in that game you fly up and down rather than forward and backward as you do in Silpheed. These areas tend to be the easiest, especially if you have 2 laser cannons. These are some of the few areas where it is easy to maintain control of the screen. Whatever you do though, don't allow Sylpheed to be crushed by the approaching walls or it's game over instantly. These 4 types of areas are repeated for a total of 20 areas, and each type is easily identifiable not only by the background but also the BGM. But if you're thinking this game is just the same 4 areas repeated over and over again with increasing difficulty, you'd be wrong. Each area has a unique layout. The fortress areas come in different colors and the planet areas have a different background each time. Look, dragon bones! The game is divided into 4 segments of 5 areas each, and there are stage select codes which allow you to skip to each of these segments if you need practice. After completing each segment, you'll get a short congratulatory animation. If you get bored watching these slowly crawl across the screen, there are Easter eggs for each one. On this screen, press the keys U, S, and A simultaneously. This doesn't stand for USA, but is actually short for Usagi, which is rabbit in Japanese. According to Japanese myth, rabbits live on the moon. The Easter egg on the next one is a little bit harder to trigger as the keys need to be held at a specific time. Normally, this little guy in the window will salute partway through the sequence. If you want to see the Easter egg here, you need to hold down the keys D, E, and A, and keep them held down until you see the Easter egg. Wait for it. Wait for it. Yeah, got him! He won't be saluting again anytime soon. The last one actually has 3 button combinations you need in order to see the entire Easter egg. Press SDI and you get a satellite. Press MON and you get a monolith. Now press BOM and BLAM! Actually, that was kind of underwhelming, wasn't it? These animations between the levels are fun to see the first few times, but after a while, the fact that you can't skip them becomes pretty annoying. When you use one of the stage select codes, the game makes you watch these before you get to play the game. Come on, this is so slow. Just get to the other side of the screen already. Ooh, look, a bunny. Everything about this game was designed to impress players in 1986. Another area where Game Arts pushes the limits is the voices. While these may sound terrible and almost indecipherable today, any sort of voice in a video game was an amazing novelty at the time. The game utilizes an audio technology called CSM, which seems to be a method for playing back recorded audio using the soundboard's FM synth channels rather than actual PCM. Game Arts was a fan of this technology and made sure to use it in all of their PC-88 titles hereafter. At first I thought these voices were synthetically produced, but the credits in Sylpheed lists voice actors, so apparently someone actually recorded these. When you first start up the game, right away you get a polygonal-looking face on the screen which is supposed to be Zacolite. Zacolite's voices at the beginning, ending, and game over are the only instances of Japanese language in the game, and what the Japanese voices are supposed to be saying is well documented on Wikipedia and elsewhere. In the case of the English voices which play between each of the areas, however, there is some room for debate over what is being said.
Welcome to Silpheed. To the right on the glass road. This is command control command. Approach the tramway.
Another slight point of contention over the game is the correct CPU speed at which to run it. This game was released the same year as the very first 8 MHz PC-88 models, and it says specifically on the back of the game that these models are supported. But reportedly the game was originally scheduled to be released a year earlier and was delayed, which means the game would have been released at a time when only 4 MHz PC-88 models existed. In any case, the game was probably made with mostly 4 MHz models in mind, and these were the models that most people owned and used to play the game when it was new. You may have heard of a Japanese site called Project Egg, a great place to buy officially licensed emulated versions of many old console and computer games. Even if you purchase the PC-88 version of Sylpheed today on Project Egg, reportedly it will run at 4 MHz, not 8. So the game may indeed be designed mostly for 4 MHz machines, but if you have a PC-88 capable of running in 8 MHz mode, it improves the slowdown issues, which can be quite severe in 4 MHz mode. However, some players prefer to play with the slowdown due to the game's difficulty. For some reason, I was able to get further in the game when running at 8 MHz, so all of the footage in this video, unless otherwise specified, is running at the faster CPU speed. The one place where I definitely had an easier time at 4 MHz was the end boss of the game. I found that I just couldn't beat it on 8 MHz, no matter how many times I tried. I eventually decided to give it a go at 4 MHz, and with a couple of tries, what do you know? In any case, I was happy to finally get to see these ending screens after so many tries. There are a couple of hidden minigames to be found on Disc B of the game. If you boot your system with an N88 basic disk, you'll see 2 available files which can be executed from the command line. The first is called Silpheed 2. Wow, it's really generous of them to give away the sequel to the game along with the original. I can't wait to see all the improvements that have been made. Oh. The second hidden game is called Return of Zacolite. Wow, another sequel. In this game, Zacolite commands you to press the spacebar just when he says his name. Any sooner or later and you lose. Basically, this bit of red text pops up on the screen at random timing, and you need to press the spacebar exactly when it does. It's near impossible when running at 4 MHz, and completely impossible at 8 MHz, adding further evidence that the main game is mostly intended to be played at 4 MHz. Nothing interesting happens if you manage to accomplish this though, so let's move on. Sylpheed was a PC-88 exclusive until nearly 2 years later in 1988, when the game was finally ported in Japan by Game Arts themselves to the Fujitsu FM77AV. This version seems to look and play almost exactly the same as the original, and it sounds exactly the same since this system has the same sound chip as the PC-88's Soundboard 1.
By an astonishing coincidence, both of our languages are exactly the same.
However, the FM77AV system actually has higher graphic capabilities than the PC-88, and you can see this in some of the 2D art, such as the new title screen and the graphic of Zacolite added to the opening. The PC-88 and FM77AV versions were the only 2 versions of the original Sylpheed ever released in Japan. The only ports to be made after that were for the North American market, programmed by Sierra Online, who had previously ported Game Art's earlier hit Thexter. The first version of Sylpheed they released was in 1988 for the Apple IIGS. If you're not familiar with the Apple IIGS, it's important to note that this is a much more powerful system than the original Apple II or IIe. The IIGS was a 16-bit PC that was backwards compatible with Apple II software, and the GS stood for graphics and sound. I remember that in my later years of elementary school, my school had a few 2GSs in addition to their fleet of 2Es. The most striking thing about this version is the sound. The music sounds really good on the 2GS's sound chip. The voice quality also sounds quite good, though I'm not sure if the voice actor here sounds very motivated.
I am an emperor of the universe, Acolyte. You cannot destroy me as long as I have glory.
Also, sadly, most of the other voices seem to be missing from the Sierra ports. Next, Sierra released another version of Silpheed, which hasn't been mentioned yet, for the Radio Shack TRS-80 color computer. This one is really Silpheed in name only, a simplified game made for a machine not powerful enough to run the original game. And lastly, of course, the DOS version for IBMs and compatibles came in 1989. Like the Apple IIGS, it's a great port of the game, which actually seems a little easier than the original, due to the higher rate of fire in all the Sierra versions. The music sounds great. Multiple sound card types are supported, like the Game Blaster and Ad-Lib. The most impressive trick that this version offers is Roland MT32 MIDI support, which sounds amazing. Zacolite's voice sounds just as bad as the PC-88 version, however in its own unique way. There was, however, a rare later version of the game which adds some PCM.
I am Zacolite.
This version also puts to rest what one of the English voices was saying in the original PC-88 version.
Welcome home, Sylpheed. You're right on the glide slope.
And that's every version of the original Sylpheed. A great game no matter how you choose to play it. There were also the various sequels to Sylpheed which were released later. The 1993 Sega CD version is simply titled Silpheed, but is a completely different game from the original, which has excellent music and uses full motion video for the backgrounds. It has a similar story to the original, so it's probably intended to be a remake. Back in the day, this was the version the other Basement Brothers and I were most familiar with. In 2000, a new game, Sylpheed: The Lost Planet, developed by Treasure and Game Arts, was released for PlayStation 2. Retaining the half-top view perspective, it carries on the series' legacy of selectable weapons, dramatic background designs, and big bosses. As an early release for the PS2, it's somewhat of a forgotten gem of a shooter with a decent soundtrack. In 2006, Square Enix released Project Silpheed with a Y for Xbox 360. It's intended as a spiritual sequel to the series, developed by former Game Arts employees at SETA with permission from Game Arts, and maintains the large amount of dialogue during gameplay from the Sega CD and PS2 games, but ditches the trademark perspective of the Silpheed series in favor of your choice of a cockpit view or behind view. The anime-style plot plays out through plenty of cutscenes between areas. It may be a very different game, but does manage to spiritually carry on the Silpheed torch. And finally, in 2011, Gung Ho Online Entertainment, who currently owns Game Arts, released Silpheed Alternative for early Android phones. This one uses a behind view again as you try to chase down and destroy targets using touchscreen stick controls. Once again, you have a lot of other pilots around talking to you during the game. My apologies for this footage. I could only get this game to run on a very old phone that doesn't support screen capture. Well, that's it. It's been 10 years and who knows if we'll ever see another Silpheed game in the future. But I'll always remember that it all started with one title in 1986 on the NEC PC-88. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of PC-88 Paradise. Please subscribe to Basement Brothers and I'll see you back here for more next time.